China's banking system is the perfect example of communism in action because it's built on a lie and it's falling apart. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. So in America, people generally trust the banking system, unless you're my roommate Carl, who keeps his money in a Hot Pockets box in our freezer. His assets are always frozen. In China, people don't really trust the banking system, and they're right to. In China, the banks are built on lies, but it's not really their fault. In a communist system, everyone has to do what the party state tells them to do. And when they can't do it, they lie about it. Because the consequences of not following orders in a communist system are unpleasant. So the Chinese Communist Party incentivizes lying. But all the lying is a problem when they're trying to manage the economy. People in China know the economy is bad, but no one, not even Xi Jinping himself, knows exactly how bad it is. China's official economic numbers are about as reliable as the battery in my 5-year-old iPhone. Here's an example. Bloomberg estimates that China has $3 trillion of hidden bad debt in its banking system. That would make the bad debt ratio for Chinese banks overall about 10%, as opposed to the official ratio, 1.5%, where it's been hovering for years. Like I said, the official numbers are a joke. They're manipulated to make things look better than they are. Regulators have for years urged the big banks to keep their reported bad loan ratio under 2%, according to people familiar with the guidance. So the banks are being told to keep the reported bad loan numbers low. Meanwhile, the actual numbers are a disaster. And that's not even the worst part. The problem is the banks don't actually have any control over how many bad loans they have. That's because the CCP is also telling them to lend as much money as possible in order to help the economy. Which means the main way banks can keep the bad loan ratio low is by lying about it. So what are the actual numbers? Well, remember, the official number is 1.5%, totally manageable. But experts estimate the bad loan ratio could be 10% or even as high as 20%. That's a huge difference. As I said earlier, if it's 10%, that means there's about $3 trillion of bad debt in the banking system. If it's 20%, that balloons up to $6 trillion. That's 6 Elon Musks. So where do these bad loans come from? Zombie. Well, zombie companies. These are companies that should have gone bankrupt, but are kept alive, or rather undead, through loans that they can't pay back. The CCP needs these zombie companies to keep shuffling along so that more people don't lose jobs. Unemployment is really bad in China right now. These zombies should be grateful just to have jobs. Anyway, banks can't call in all these bad loans because that would kill the zombie companies and a bunch of people would lose their jobs. And it would also raise the bank's bad debt ratio, which would get them into trouble with the government. Instead, the banks extend and pretend. Yes, that's literally what it's called. Sounds like my love life. Oh, God. They keep rolling over loans, deferring payments, and capitalizing interest. Tricks to make the loans look like they're still active on paper. But the more bad loans there are, the riskier it is for banks. If a zombie company actually dies, the bank has to write off the loss of the loan. And if the bank doesn't have the money to cover its losses, it will need a bailout or it will fail. The longer the situation goes on, the more of a drag this becomes on China's financial system. In other words, if there are enough zombie companies, they'll infect the rest of the Chinese economy. That's why a recent Rhodium Group report described the weakness of China's domestic economy as prolonged decay. But these zombie loans aren't even the dumbest thing Chinese banks are doing. To see the true absurdity of the CCP's communist system, let's look at phantom loans. What's a phantom loan? It's there, inside your mind. Okay, like I said earlier, the Communist Party has been telling banks to lend more money in order to help the economy. But when the economy is bad, people don't want to take on more debt. In a normal capitalist system, banks would only lend money if there's enough demand and the banks can make a profit. But in a communist system, the state can just force banks to loan money, which doesn't cause any problems at all, like all of the zombie loans I just told you about. So what do banks who are forced to loan money but can't risk making even more bad loans do? They make phantom loans. Bloomberg has an article from last November about these phantom loans. Since no one actually wants to borrow money, the banks ask businesses to take out a quick loan so they can hit the CCP mandated loan targets. The business holds the loan for a few weeks or even just a few days. Then they repay the loan. The bank covers the interest. And there's even a name for this. It's called a quick lend and recover. And the practice is spreading as banks come under unprecedented pressure to hit government-set targets that can't be met by real demand. I just want to take a moment to make sure you understand just how stupid this is. The CCP mandates that banks have to lend money to stimulate the economy. But the Chinese people know that the economy is broken and the banks aren't trustworthy, so the banks are having trouble making real loans. So instead, they're making fake loans. And they're actually losing money on these fake loans because the banks are paying the interest themselves. All of this so they don't get in trouble with the CCP. Someone should send Caleb Hammer to China to give them a financial audit. This Bloomberg article has an even more absurd story in which a business owner tries to repay a bank loan ahead of schedule, and the bank offered to pay him to keep the loan going instead. Because the bank needed the loan to meet the CCP's loan targets. Yes, you heard me correctly. The bank was paying the man to keep borrowing money. Banks are spending all this energy and money jumping through hoops to meet the CCP's unrealistic targets. But none of it is actually helping the economy. It's all a waste. And it's not just small banks doing this. A government audit found that 6 state-owned banks issued almost $80 billion in fake loans back in 2023. But don't worry, the CCP has a solution. Punish the banks for making phantom loans. Surely that will solve the problem without somehow causing even more perverse incentives in a top-down authoritarian system. So the CCP tells banks to make more loans, so banks have to make zombie loans that they have to lie about so they don't get in trouble. Or they make phantom loans that they have to lie about so they don't get in trouble. And that's why China's banks are built on lies. This is just one small example of how dysfunctional a communist system can get. Think of this the next time someone sends you a TikTok about how great China's cities are. All that's underneath is rot. Look, a new generation in this country is being sold a lie. That communism means fairness and freedom. But China today shows a totally different story. Communism forces everyone to lie just to survive. It takes away your freedom. It denies you a better future. And that's why I make China Uncensored, to inoculate the next generation from a soul-destroying ideology by showing them what actually happens when a communist government takes over. If you want to help show the world what really happens in a communist system, support China Uncensored. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you soon.